Hi everyone, it's Robin again in the Choosing Joy series. Today we're shooting our fourth video in the series about how to find happiness when in vitro fertilization does not work for you and your partner. So I want to start by sharing my personal story with IVF with you and tell you some tips and strategies and things that I found to be helpful when I was trying to find happiness and reasons to smile in a time that I felt sort of unsuccessful and very disappointed. So I'm gonna start my story with my cancer journey, and this ties directly to my IVF journey. So if you've watched the first episode, you know all about my process of having cancer. I did have Hodgkin's lymphoma in my early 20s. And the reason I really wanna start with this is not simply because that's the reason why, or one of the reasons why I'm unable to be a biological mother, but also because I feel like there's something really important in that process that I need to share. When I was in my early 20s and was diagnosed with cancer, as I was going through my process at MD Anderson, I do remember vaguely a conversation with a nurse in which she suggested freezing eggs, which is a very smart suggestion. The problem is, as I said, I was in my early 20s and I was in the room with my parents who were very concerned. I was going through a whole lot of procedures that I did not know what they meant, didn't know how it was gonna feel, how it was gonna turn out. And the whole thing was a scary process, really from beginning to end. And so this was another thing being laid on my plate that as a younger person, I did not understand the full value of. My parents and I decided that because we were doing all of these things, that was freezing eggs was another procedure that I would need to do. And I was so young, I wasn't even married, so I didn't know how important this would be for me in the future. The reason I'm sharing it now is because I think that's sort of an unspoken story, and I wish that people would hear and talk about this more. I wish that people were more open and talked more about what happens when you are a young person if you don't freeze your eggs or your specimen in order to be a parent later on in life. I wish that I would have had that conversation where someone had said to me, Robin, I know it's another procedure, but if you don't do this, then you may never be a biological mother, because when you get chemotherapy and treatments that you need to survive cancer, a lot of times they can hurt, damage, or eliminate your chances at being a parent. So I feel like that conversation needs to be had. I think people need to talk more openly about it and share it more often. That's an important message I wanted to start with. But because I had Hodgkin's lymphoma and I did go through that process, particularly chemotherapy, it did impact my ability to be a mother. So when I married my husband, of course we wanted to have children. And so it was not working. And I had already been told that because I had cancer, that was probably going to be an issue. But we did try to find someone who could help us. We were referred to a IVF specialist in Austin, Texas. And he was a wonderful person, very nice, very kind, very knowledgeable, and we loved him. We went through the entire process of IVF. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with in vitro fertilization, it is a process in which you take some hormones. So it starts with a month-long process of injecting yourself with special hormones that help your eggs to grow bigger and become the right size to be extracted to be used. So once you've gone through the process of taking the hormones and going to visit the doctor regularly, where they're checking the eggs, making sure they're growing at the right rate, and sort of adding more days if they need to in the cycle, or less, and they're trying to make it as perfect as they can. And then you have extraction day. On that day, they do take out the eggs that are the big ones, the ones that look the healthiest and ready to go. And they also extract from the male, which can be done naturally, of course. And they put the two specimens together. So they try to pull the best and brightest and put them all together in kind of what I like to think of as a science project. So they go together and they're, as my understanding, in a heating element, and they're kept in there for several days. There is a process, and I don't remember exactly the number of days, but after so many days, they look and see which specimens that got put together became viable embryos. So after so many days, they call and say, it looks like we have this many viable embryos. And then they will look a few days later and continue to check. In our process, they extracted 10 eggs, put them together, and put the science project away. When it came down to it, I wanna say after my first conversation, there was possibly 5 viable. In my next phone call a few days later, they were looking at possibly 3. Where it kind of went south from there for my husband and I is when it came time for what would have been the next process in the IVF plan, which is where they implant the viable embryos back into the mother and then hope that they take, and then from there you can carry and deliver your own child. The problem for us, of course, as you know, because I went through that process of chemotherapy, my eggs were not being the champions they should have been, and so my husband and I ended up with no viable embryos. In fact, at one point we were told, I can give you all the 3 that I have, and I promise you that none of them will make a baby. So that was hard to hear. Now let's start with this. First of all, you've been taking hormones the entire month, so that already makes you a little bit more emotional, and then you're told that, and you're trying to deal with the information as best you can. You try to be positive. I think we went through the process of, well, do we do it again? I mean, what do we do? But there came a time that we had to be realistic with ourselves. In all honesty, it is an expensive process, of course, as you probably know, and I'd already been told that it was unlikely. So we didn't believe that continuing to put money into that process was going to be beneficial in the end. And it's certainly not for the emotional toll that it took on us. It's very hard. I'll tell you, as a woman, I did the whole, what if I can't be a mom? Am I being a woman? Am I fulfilling my purpose? That was extremely difficult for me. And I know that it was difficult for my husband to watch me go through it and try to give me some comfort and solace, because he didn't know what to say. He hadn't taken all the hormones, and he knew that I was disappointed. I know he was disappointed, but he was trying to be comforting. And this isn't a situation I think that people are used to having to comfort each other through. It's hard. And of course you question why, but there are lots of things that happen in this life that make us question why. And as you've seen through my series, I've had several other. So this was another thing that I had to face with the faith that I have. And so this is where we come to the next part of this. How did I deal with it? How did I get to the point where I could be okay with it? I'm gonna be honest with you, just like I was in the video where I talked about losing my brother. It's not easy. I certainly didn't just go, okay, I'm over it. I mean, yes, I had to come to a point where I chose to move forward, but it took time and some positive thought process. So let me start with the first one. First and foremost, and I say this in every video, it is that religious, special relationship that you have with God that is so providing of peace and comfort. God is a big picture being, and he has this whole beautiful picture that he's painted out that we can't see right now. I don't think that we're meant to understand it while we're here on this earth, but I do trust his big picture, and I do trust that all the pieces fit together in a way that is going to make my life incredibly beautiful and incredibly valuable. And because I trust that, and because I believe that, I can find some comfort. Of course, it's disappointing. God, I wanted to be a biological mom. I wanted to see what my kids with my husband would look like, but I know that he always has my best interest at heart. I want to share something while I'm thinking about this. I sometimes forget to say this because I'm in my 40s now and I'm so used to it, but I actually am adopted. And I was adopted when I was 16 days old. For me, there's a whole nother reason to have biological children. Not that I don't think adoption is amazing. It's absolutely incredible. My husband and I are 100% considering it. Of course, I would love to continue that cycle. It's what made me who I am today. I mean, the people who loved me and cared for me and raised me from the time I was 16 days old, that's my mom and dad. So my views on parenting are different, I know, than maybe someone who isn't adopted, but that does play a role in how I feel about this. So I wanted to throw that in there as something, if you know someone who is adopted and is going through this process, and maybe to know that I understand and I get what it's like and that it is difficult. The next thing I would say is that you have to have a really solid relationship with your spouse when things like this happen. I know that when devastating things happen, there are times when spouses get pulled apart, right? Bad things happen and they grow apart, they look to different things for comfort, they stop finding joy in each other. And what I can say is this: when you take God and your spouse out of the situation, it is going to become incredibly difficult to find that joy that you're looking for. You have to intentionally seek your spouse in times when you're hurting like this, especially in a situation like IVF, where it's something that you're literally going through together because it's something that you two are hoping for as a couple. So I found myself really leaning on Brandon, but also not pushing him away. I continued to intentionally date him, intentionally try to find happy moments with him, intentionally continue to do the things that we loved together through every season of the year, and not to allow this to keep us from being the couple that we were. So I think not pushing him away brought me a great deal of joy, because I still had those happy moments with him, and there was still that hope there that because our relationship is strong, no matter what happens next in our future as husband and wife, we're going to be okay. And finally, and I think this is one of the most important things, you can literally find kids everywhere. So when you can't have your own, of course there is adoption, of course there's foster care, and all of those things are wonderful, and we have looked into and studied those things deeply. But let me give you an example. I'm a teacher. I have my students. They are my children. I care about them. I care about their well-being. I want them to be successful. I have a dance team, and in fact, I want to show you, I'm wearing a shirt tomorrow. It says, I don't need a Valentine. I have a whole dance team full of them. And the bottom line is, it's so true. Those are my children. Those are my dance babies. Those are my classroom students. They feel a need for me in which I know that I am being maternal towards them. I am giving them love and confidence, and I am building them up just as I would if they were my own children. And I get to send them home at the end of the day. But probably the most important thing that I could say right now that came out of this, if you remember from my last video, my brother did pass away, leaving behind his 4-year-old daughter, and I get to help raise her. So you see, everything is full circle. And maybe it didn't work out for me exactly the way that I had planned it, but I have very much a daughter in my life that I get to love and take care of, and that can never be taken away from me. If you found this video helpful in any way, please like, love, share, pass it on to someone who needs to hear this message. Our next video in the Choosing Joy series is going to have an incredible person that we get to interview and talk to who has found happiness in some really icky situations, and I can't wait for you to hear her message and learn how she found joy in dark times in her life. So until next time I see you, I hope to find you intentionally choosing joy.